Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Preccelerator workshop. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and especially Barbara Bickham, one of our stellar mentors and a person who's very knowledgeable about the whole startup ecosystem and has been involved for at least as long as I have been, and probably a little bit longer. But she's going to talk today about Precede Funding. And without further ado, because I don't believe in long introductions, let's get into it.
All right, let's hit it and get it. Well, thanks so much, Lynn, for having me here. We are here to talk about Precede Funding. My name is Barbara Bickham. I am the managing partner and founder of the Women's Innovation Fund Accelerator. And we do gender balance, C-level, emerging tech, sustainable investing. And sustainable can mean many things outside of environmental. It could mean fostering the wealth gap. The gender balance C-level is kind of equaling out the women. We also work in kind of sustainable smart cities. So these are kind of some of the things that map with the UN sustainability goals. I'm also the founder and CTO of Trailin Ventures. Trailin is my blockchain emerging tech advisory. So I advise investors and companies on emerging tech, all emerging tech. I don't do biotech or nanotech, but we do AI, blockchain, AR, mixed reality, IoT, and then we've added quantum computing onto that. And that's my email there, expert@Trailin. All right, so what if you failed at starting a company in the past? We know that's not your fault. And what if you were concerned in the past that you were trying to succeed and you just couldn't do it? And, you know, sometimes your friends and your family and your peers are just, they're for you, but they're not for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about these pre-seed funding strategies, because you're on a long journey, and in the pre-seed, you know, that's the longest journey of them all. So we're going to talk about a little bit about investing, you know, how you find your investor and kind of how do you make revenues. So I'm Barbara Bickham. I have 35 years of experience in technology and entrepreneurship. I'm a native LA person. I've spent about 10 plus years in BC. That's how I met Len. That's how I met Mike. That's how I met Ellie. I ran an angel group here in LA. I got it up to 450. That was in 2007, 2008, a few less angels. And our fund is very well credentialed. We won awards for Best Emerging Tech Accelerator last year, and also Equal Opportunity in Private Equity. And then we've won one as well this year. We're waiting to announce that from Acquisition International again. All right, so I was also a founder at some point in time raising money for my product. And when I was doing that, you always have to try and figure out, what does the investor want? And prior to all the internet and all the wonderful tools that existed, I had to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to meet with investors. And for me, that was tough, which meant I had to get up at 5, then you have to get dressed. Then it was always an investor breakfast, Len. So it took huge amounts of time out of my day. I'm tired. I'm not really a morning person. So I created this core MVP lab to kind of help companies with that. And it's to help them find investors and scale their companies. So how does this even apply to you? I mean, everybody is always looking for investors, and they're looking to build their MVP. Now, if you don't have an MVP and you just have an idea, there are so many tools and techniques out there now where you don't really have to have all these heavy lifter developers. And when you have an MVP, that helps mitigate risk across investors, and it also helps with your monetization. And it helps you shorten the learning curve as far as like where your product fits in the market. So I have worked with Annie Brown, her name, her company is Lips. She's the founder and CEO of Lips. Lips is the Instagram killer. That's what I call it. She is actually working with people that have gotten deplatformed from Instagram and Facebook because of their content. So I've worked with her maybe since 2019, prior to the pandemic. I met her and we worked together on her blockchain and AI solution. I helped her architect and design that. I helped her with her patent application. I've helped her in multiple ways. So these are kind of some of the things I do. I help with that at the Preccelerator as well. That's another way you can access me. But I mean, really, her company has moved very much forward because of my advisement to her and how we kind of work not only on the funding side, but also on the strategic side of her company. So this is what we're going to talk about: preparing for your pre-seed round, funding opportunities, investor and funding selection. Okay, so you really only need 4 things, in my opinion, from my investor hat, if you are really getting ready for a pre-seed round. You need to have done a business model canvas. I hope everyone knows what that is, but basically it's the 9 quadrants. The 1 is the unique selling proposition. There's the key elements on the left. There's all the customer part at the right, and at the bottom is the monetization. The only thing that's missing on the business model canvas is the competitive analysis. So you kind of need to know where you are in the frame of your idea. And even if you don't have an idea, let's say you've moved past and you have an MVP even, you can still use the business model canvas consistently because you can evolve it to scale. If you have an idea, you need a no-code MVP. You really don't need a fancy CTO like me. I'd love for you guys to have me, but you really don't need one nowadays because they have so many tools out there. Airtable, Card. I mean, they got so many tools where you could build something and it looks as great as if a developer built it for the initial MVP to find your product market fit. You need monetization. How are you going to make money? What is your business and revenue model? If you don't understand that, then really it's hard to convince an investor to invest in you, because what are they investing in? A lot of investors don't want to invest in just ideas. And then you kind of need your first set of customers, like who are the people that are going to buy from you? That's why the MVP is important. So here is a case study of somebody I took from idea to revenue. We did this in 9 weeks. So Travel Porter was a company, it still is a company, it's still alive, that did travel without luggage. And Stephanie came to me and she had like an idea. And we applied all those 4 things I said in the last slide, except we did a no-code version of it. And we literally got her to revenues in 9 weeks. We got our first swipe of the card within the first 9 weeks. So what we did is we put up a website. We said, who is our market? Women. What kind of clothing are we doing? Rental. How are we going to deploy the rental clothing via FedEx? And how are we going to accept money? Stripe. So we literally put all that together and we got our first customer in the first 9 weeks. Now, did that mean we were ready for pre-seed money? Not quite, but we at least knew that our product had a market for it because people would pay. Then we kind of scaled it up. Then we went and got the pre-seed money. Okay, so funding opportunities. Well, most entrepreneurs think, well, I'm not raising any money. Like, I'm not, being successful at raising money. But there's so many ways to get money for a startup company. You can get grants, you can get loans, you could do crowdfunding, friends and family is an opportunity. You could bootstrap it, which is get customers, or, like you guys are here at the Preccelerator, some accelerators and incubators give money out. But I think that from a pre-seed viewpoint, most people only look at, I want to get an angel investor, or I want to get a VC, or I want to get a person that's not at the stage I am. So getting some of these other funding opportunities is good. Also, some of these other funding opportunities are non-dilutive. So for example, if you get a grant, then that costs you no equity. If you get a loan, that costs you no equity. Your friends and family may or may not cost you equity, just depends. If you get customers, that costs you no equity. So you also have to think about, in the very early phase of your company, if I accept money from an investor, I'm going to give up a lot of my company. because they're taking the most risk, even more than me. Because you had an idea, which is great, but ideas are really everywhere. Everyone has ideas. It's really about who's executing on the ideas. So, you know, for your own kind of preservation later, you actually want to think about some of these alternative ways to raise money for yourself in the pre-seed. And usually I recommend people go get customers, because customers serve two purposes. One, they give you revenue. Two, they give you feedback. You're not really going to get feedback from grant people, loans. You may from your friends and family, but that can cause a sticky situation. Nobody wants to be in that situation when you're at Thanksgiving or some family gathering and, you know, everyone's looking at you like, where's my return on my money? So, you know, things can get uncomfortable. But if you have customers and you're really bootstrapping this, that could be the most powerful, and it looks good to investors later. So here's a case study of someone that went kind of through our accelerator at WIFAX, and they've raised about $400,000 now coming from the accelerator. So really, we worked with them on not only the blockchain and AI portions of this Fuego Fino strategically, because they're one of the portfolio companies of the fund. We also work with them on their higher level strategic. So I'm kind of on the board of their company as well. So we help them not only with their partnerships, strategic partnerships, customer acquisition, because from our perspective, or my perspective as an investor, I want to have as much revenues and as much customers as possible, because that just makes your value more. And it's just less diluted. So that's Fuego Fino. They're actually still up on, just went back on WeFunder. So they are crowdfunding as well. All right, so there are many different types of funding options, and sometimes, companies don't think about them. And you have to look at the ones that make sense to you at this point in time, because there is something that we've created called a capital stack. You know, there's the pre-seed, there's the seed, there's the series A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, IPO, like many in between. So, you know, where you want to give up equity is important. How you want to give up equity is important. And, you know, how much equity you give up is important. Because one thing that can happen to founders is you give up too much equity, you no longer own your company. And I've seen that happen a couple of times, like luckily, not to anyone I know, but we've all kind of heard stories of where startup founders have given up way too much equity and now they're not in their company anymore. So you don't want that to happen to you either. All right, so let's talk a bit about the investor and funding selection. So some people say, well, I don't know how to find investors. Well, I mean, really, there's so many places now to find investors. It's like, you don't have to get up at 7 in the morning anymore, which is awesome. But, you know, AngelList has big syndicates. Signal is good because Signal has two things. One, it's got the connection from an investor to another investor. And the second thing about Signal that we kind of train our people on is like, what type of check size do these people write? So in Signal, you can see these are Series A people, they write this level check. These are, you know, the 25 to 50K people, they're more angels. They're, you know, I don't think Jason's on there, but I know someone else is on there. I know big up, but you know, you just have to look and see like where are they going to write for my stage? And then are they proper for what I'm doing?
Right. Yeah. Robert, if I can interrupt on Signal.
Go ahead, Len.
Yeah, if I can interrupt.
Sure.
On Signal, you can search for stage, you can search for industry, yes, and you can search for region.
Yes.
And it's a really good tool and resource out there. I
Absolutely.
use it all the time. That's what we use here at the Preccelerator.
Yeah, so we use that too in our accelerator as well. We use AngelList, we use Signal, and the funny one that's on here is Twitter. There are a lot of venture capitalists on Twitter, and there always have been. And most people laugh at me when I say, go on Twitter and da-da-da-da-da. My friend says, I wouldn't take a Twitter person. I'm like, why not? You're on there. Like there's a very, very active venture capital community on Twitter now. So, you know, they do exist and they are out there. The other thing, just to circle back on what Len was talking about with Signal, that's great. Signal also has the ability for you to create like a pitch, like a one sheet. And if you find an investor, you can then send it to them via the Signal one sheet. And I have seen some of those. Those are really great as well. I mean, clearly you can still meet investors at pitch competitions. One of my business partners, he loves pitch competitions. He loves seeing all the different companies. You know, they're virtualized and now they're becoming less, you know, hopefully they'll open up and become less virtualized. But, you know, that's still a way to meet investors. And then Founder Suite. Founder Suite is kind of one of those matchmaking things where it's like, okay, I'm trying to raise $500,000. And, you know, there's these sets of investors and it kind of creates like almost like a Trello board for your investment, but they do have a lot of investors on that platform as well. So that's kind of how you find them. And so this is an example of what happened with Baggage Nanny. Baggage Nanny actually reached out to this 1517 fund, which I didn't know these people, but they came through our accelerator as well. And we create something called a data room for them. And we have a big 4-level data room. And these people really had no idea. When she told them, they said, oh yeah. You guys don't really have a data room. But when they saw it, they just couldn't believe it. So, you know, we know that when you are packaged properly and you target the right people, then you can, your probability of getting money is higher. It's not 100% because it's never 100%, but it's a lot higher. Now, how do you find investors for you? I'm going to leave it on this slide a little bit. And I'm going to talk about that. Now, we have the two kind of biotech companies here, which is, you know, it's hard for me to find investors for that, but there are several levels of finding an investor. You have your primary person. So like if you're in biotech, you're clearly going to look at all the biotech people because that makes sense, right? But then there's another layer there. Are you guys doing data? You know, clearly if you're collecting data, which in the biotech area, I'm assuming you are, then there are a set of data investors. So who's investing in just data? They do exist. Then if you're doing any artificial intelligence, there may be some people in that realm that you're looking at. Who are the AI investors? And then now you have 3 different sets of adjacent investors that could potentially invest in your company. Then the other thing, which I didn't write on here, but I should have written, but they kind of come later, is like the corporate strategics. Is there someone that you could strategically start looking at aligning with, like Merck, or, you know, they have all these vaccine companies, Pfizer and all these people, or they have like, who is here? Like Siemens and Medtronic, you know, like, can you start aligning with their corporate venture arms? Those companies that might M&A you, those companies that might purchase your IP, the companies that might be interested in aligning with you and powdering you later. So these are kind of how we train our people to look. That's how Crystal got the 1517 fund. They were actually investing in, this is another travel company. So they invested in travel. So that was her main top line person, but she had data, she had other things. And so she could go out to other people as well. So you can't just limit yourself to your top line folks. Most people do that. Like, I'm just gonna go after all the biotech people. Okay, well, now you're competing. You're competing against others. The other thing about investing is there are companies that are heavy tech, like you biotech people, and then there's companies that are tech enabled.
Shut up! I'm listening
like,
to actual experts.
Just mute.
Up!
Just mute. It's okay. Just mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
It's all good. Just no worries. I can handle it even on the Zoom. Baggage Nanny was a travel company, and she had many different. You know, she was a tech-enabled company, so she wasn't a heavy tech company. Travel Porter is is also a tech-enabled company. So from an investor side, we look at things differently, like Baggage Nanny or Travelport, than we do at Lips, which is an actual tech company. So if you're building like an Instagram or a marketplace, or DeFi product, or fill in the blank, quantum tools, quantum computing tools, that's going to be more heavy tech. We're going to look at you differently than if you're like a Baggage Nanny or Travelport or a tech-enabled company. And so the tech-enabled companies actually have a better, wider berth of investors they can go to versus the heavy tech ones. So like if you're in the blockchain space, there's, you may have AI there, you may have data there, but a lot of the blockchain people are going to be more attracted to you than the data people or the AI people. So that's just kind of what we found. And it does kind of depend on what you're doing, because like some people, like we don't invest in biotech only because we have no expertise. So it also depends on the expertise of the fund. So you need to also look at what is the fund's thesis. What are they really investing in? Look at their portfolio companies, look at who's gone through their accelerator, look at them. And, we look at you, you look at us. Can we play well together? And can we all just get along and be friends? And if so, it makes for a good kind of match. Because at the pre-seed level, this is a long investment. Could be 9 years, could be 8 years. We're talking a long-term investment. At seed stage, we're even talking 5 to 7 years long, so you have to also think about, from a venture capital side, the life cycle of a fund is short, 10 years. And so really, where are you in that life cycle? And, if you're early, great, get powder, but you gotta be mindful. It's going to be many years relationship. All right, Len, that's kind of all I had. Are you guys enjoying this webinar? Is there anything else? Any questions?
So let's go to some questions, folks. If you'd like to ask a question, just unmute yourself. This is a small group. Feel free to chime in.
I can stop sharing. Oh wait, let me go to the.
And I may call on you to kind of describe, what your journey has been. So, John, you've been at this for a couple of years now. Talk to us a little bit about your pre-seed funding strategies and what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Of course. So we founded XP Health in 2018, middle of 2018. We did a little bit of friends and family initially, and then we kind of sought out some accelerator programs, SAM Preccelerator. We didn't actually get in the first time we applied, so we continued being persistent with regards to showing up to the events, learning, and of course improving and demonstrating some traction. So that helped us, and definitely helped us as well. We currently use some of the tools that was mentioned to identify investors.
That's good.
I think part of the challenge around building that rapport, or even getting the intro to investors, is also around how to contact them. So whether access their email address or not, or whether you're using a Chrome extension or a tool that you pay for, or if you can get an intro, but what I've also identified in the recent 6 to 7 months is that sometimes there may be an intro, but it could take longer to get in touch with the right person. And so you kind of reach out directly to the person, as opposed to wait for the person to get back to you and then to make an introduction and to let them know, etc. But that's kind of been our experience so far. I think also we've kind of planned ahead. So we have really good relationships with VCs that will fund our seed round. But as we've learned, we're just shy of those milestones that we need to reach before we can actually raise that seed. So we've got those soft commitments and those, yes, I'll invest if, which I think is still better than not having those relationships at all. So we're kind of taking a step back, going back to our pre-seed, reaching back out to previous investors, and we're also considering crowdfunding as well.
Okay. So I heard a couple of things on that, Len, and then there's a question I'll field in the chat. I heard about, and then I'll hit up, is your name Divya? Divya? I'll hit up you third, Divya. I kind of heard a couple things, which was good that you brought up. Number one, how does an investor want to be contacted? So I do this podcast. I'm also the host of the Female VC Lab, and I talk to female VCs, and a lot of them want to be contacted on LinkedIn. So some of them want to be contacted on LinkedIn. Some of them want to be contacted on Twitter. Some of them want an email. So you're right about that. It depends on how they want to be contacted. So that's number one. Number two thing I heard, crowdfunding is great. If, like, crowdfunding makes sense for certain things and not other things. So crowdfunding is a viable thing, but you really have to craft your story well. If you can craft a story well, and we're all in Hollywood, so we can find people to craft stories well, more than most people, then really you can do well crowdfunding. It really has to like touch people and things of that nature, because otherwise they just won't invest. And it does require some effort on your part. It's not like you're just gonna put up on a platform and like, oh, all of a sudden, there is some effort there. Ellie, I will let you get to the touching on it.
And
Yes,
Barbara, let me piggyback on what you were just talking about crowdfunding, because
Yes.
I'd like to make the distinction between equity crowdfunding and
Yes.
crowdfunding a product for marketing.
Yes.
And I know Abby was asking a question about direct to consumer and
Consumer product good investment trends.
Consumer
I
product.
do have an answer for that.
And so there's some opportunity sometimes on the non-equity crowdfunding platforms to get your product out, to get visibility, and to tell a good story around it. And we were just having that same conversation with Top Dog, with Ryan.
I see, yeah.
Using non-equity crowdfunding as a possibility of using their existing customers to get excited about what they're doing and maybe bring some revenues in on the
Right.
short term while they're still building and getting to monetization.
That's smart. Ellie, you want to jump in before I answer Abby's question?
Yes. So
Talk about the infinity investors.
there's a class of investors or a subclass of angel investors called affinity investors or affinity angel investors. And not every business applies, but if you can find wealthy individuals who have an affinity for what you do that goes beyond just looking for a rate of return. And I'll give one example, and I could give many, but I don't want to take up too much time. Gene Kleiner, who I was blessed to know in my life, I was on the board of directors. Kleiner Perkins Coughlin. I was on the board of directors of his wife's company. He put me into a couple companies before I went on my own. He retired from Kleiner and Perkins at the age of 80. He resigned from every board of directors he was on. And he was determined to just, relax and enjoy the rest of his life without, and enjoy the many millions of dollars that he made without being in business. Within a year of his retirement, he wrote $1 million check to a company called Resound. And he joined their board of directors. And I asked him why. I said, I thought you didn't want to do this anymore. He said, they solved the problem for me. Eugene was hard of hearing. And his whole life, he was dealing, he had hearing aids. He was never satisfied with any of them, did the best he could. This company made a hearing aid that was superior to anything that was on the market at the time, and he loved it. He loved it so much that he wanted to see them succeed. So I tell entrepreneurs all the time, if you're solving a problem or working in an area where there are individuals who would love to see you succeed, irrespective, and that's not to say they want to lose money, but if it's irrespective of, or even more importantly than the money they would get in a rate of return, and this is, this is not VC funds, these are individuals.
Yes.
If you can kind of research that realm, that world that you're dealing in, and find out, who supports those kinds of things, who has
That's a good point.
a personal reason why they want you to succeed, and you can find a way to get to that individual or those individuals, then the barriers to getting an investment are generally lower than they would be otherwise. And that's something that you should always think about. You just brainstorm it, you do a little bit of research, and find a way to get to those people.
You know what? I'm gonna right on top of your point that I'm gonna answer Abby's question, because I've talked to several females that are in the direct-to-consumer CPG investment trend space. So I will answer that. But you have an exceptional point. But now I think things have evolved because of ESG, on boards and in other realms. And I think there are more impactful affinity investors, even as a fund now, than there have ever been. You might hear impact fund or ESG, you'll hear about ESG. That's kind of like the impact, then that kind of covers multiple different, family offices, impact funds. So really, I think, I agree with you. There's still the individual affinity investor, but there are also now more funds that are affinitized as well. So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, Abby's been waiting very patiently for her question. Are there any insights into the direct-to-consumer CPG investment trends? Is there one specifically, or are we talking about it generally? Is there something specifically direct-to-consumer related to your product? Did Abby drop off?
No, she's still here.
I'm
Abby?
just curious.
There you
Hi
are.
there. Sorry about that. Generally, I'm curious, but also I'm working with a co-founder on a home cleaning product.
Oh, home cleaning product. Okay, that's interesting. Is it created in a sustainable way?
Yes, and we even have some NASA ingredients in the formulation that are a lot of, it'll be a lot of fun to introduce.
Okay.
We're interested in creating a ritual of well-being for the home that's a little more lax than what's on the market right now. We noticed it's a $32 billion market without a lot of brand penetration, and particularly in the elevated space, there are a few. The one that we kind of look to the most is the Laundress, which is not necessarily a DTC brand, but they sold for 100 million in 2019 before this sort of acceleration in the sort of cleaning obsession that happened during coronavirus. Some of those numbers were at 50% during coronavirus, and it's going to go down, but we all sort of have changed. And then we kind of have this saturation among, like fans of beauty products. There were 30,000 beauty brand products launched in 2020, 13,000 of which were launched in store. And this is sort of the prestige category. And like the stores were closed. I mean, it's just like a craze. So we feel like those people who have like the mini fridges in their homes probably would like to have a more elevated cleaning experience that fits with their lifestyle. And we're incorporating scent. We also noticed the scent has been up, double digits, last year and this year. Home scent.
So, I mean, it sounds to me, there's kind of two sets of things happening. So the reason why Fuego Fino is on a crowdfunding platform is because it is it's alcohol. So we sell alcohol. We also do things in an environmentally friendly, sustainable way. We just launched like a vegan wine, and that has its own connotations as far as like, it is a real vegan wine with no animal products whatsoever in it. So really, your company may be more geared towards that. I have talked to a couple of ladies. One lady I think she invested in Peloton, this lady. I just talked to her last week. And there's a few ladies I've been talking to, and it seems like the women have more affinity to the direct-to-consumer CPG than the men. Only because like a cleaning product is something that we use as women. Not saying you guys don't use cleaning products, but like that, what you're describing, Abby, is more of women normally buy that. I mean, that's just what they buy. Now, the couple of women I talked to in this area kind of dealt more with mass market because they felt like the bigger distribution you had, the more kind of, revenues you would have. Because, you want to be on your own website, and then you want to be in other things. So they could do Target, they could do Whole Foods, they could do multiple of the different, store, massive change, Kroger's. That nobody said Walmart or Costco. More like the mass market Target. My other friend got into Target, but I mean, so it kind of depends on how you want to position yourself. Are you trying to get into, I don't know, is Bloomingdale's even still around? Half these stores, I don't even know if they're even alive anymore from coronavirus. So really, it's just kind of where you want to be in the CPG space. But if you have a physical product, I mean, that's ripe for either Kickstarter, the rewards-based, or the equity-based crowdfunding.
Yeah. The other thing, Abby,
At
to
this
look
pre-seed
at,
level.
the other thing to look at as a case study would be The Honest Company, and look at how they launched, how they funded,
Yeah,
and how they've exited now. So because
That's
they're
true.
in that CPG space, and they're in the clean environmental product space, it sounds like there may be some similarities that you can glean from as you try to launch that product. Is that?
and there are way more funds too that are measuring impact, not just environmental. I ask sustainability because that's one of the impacts, but like also, how are you creating jobs? Who are you creating jobs for? How is your company configured? How, like, what does your hiring look like? I mean, there are many things under this ESG sustainable element that more and more funds are looking at, and they call it impact. And how are you really measuring that? And how are you really tracking that? And how are you really executing on that? I think that's important, because you can say it, which is great, but then, what is the real configuration of that? So somebody like us, we would at WIFX, we would absolutely look at that and go, what is your real impact that you're in, your real sustainability that you're really saying? Okay, Mark, I'm going to answer your question. Yes, Divya has been waiting so long. Thank you, Divya.
No problem. Thank you so much for your time today.
No worries.
So I'm in deep tech, which kind of creates a lot of problems in terms
deep tech, which version of that?
We're doing computer vision. So we're pairing it. We're trying to create Control F for real life, and so we're using computer vision on augmented reality eyewear. So we're kind of waiting on that market.
Got it.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, it takes a lot of technical work.
Yes.
So one of the things that I've been running into is I feel like I'm meeting a lot of investors, and perhaps some of them are even pre-seed, but they're turned off by the idea that it would take us a while to kind of build the product. What would be a good strategy? Because obviously, if we can hire more people to do the development, we can get things done a lot quicker. What would be a good strategy for us to kind of come up with money to hire people even?
Well, so you said so you almost need, because it is deep tech. So I deal with this on a blockchain level every day, because people just still don't even know what it is. So even with Bitcoin at whatever, $40,000, $50,000, they still have no clue.
I work in blockchain, so I feel you.
You work in that as well. There's no clue there. But you almost have to show them, give them a visualization of what you imagine it being. So I don't know if that means make a video. I don't know if that means make a mock-up AR. I mean, I was working with EV Realities. They came out of the Preccelerator as well. And they could use the Google Cardboard, and they could demonstrate their product just on the Google Cardboard. So you didn't have to have Oculus. If you had it, was better. If you didn't have to have, the Microsoft version. If you had it, was better. But from an MVP perspective, she could show someone how it worked. So if you could almost without having to hire a ton of people, this is the low code, no code MVP version. Rig up something on the phone and go, look, this is kind of how I envision it. This is, where we're going to get to. Then because the people are visual, they can't always grasp it in their mind. Sometimes they have to see it and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. Does that make sense? But you should be able to do this because they have AR creation tools now. It's amazing. You don't really have to code that too much. I'm not saying don't code it ever, but we're talking about pre-seed. So like those 4 things are real. Like you kind of want to do the business model canvas. You kind of want to have an MVP. You kind of want to know your business model, and you kind of want to, know how you're going to make money.
Yeah, so we had made a video at one point, and that's kind of what we're working with when we go to pitch. And we do well. Like I've only ever done one pitch competition. I did a demo day. It was super fun, and I'm totally in love with just pitching forever. I could do it for the rest of my life. I just think I don't know. I keep getting kind of this feedback of you're too early, you're too early, you're too early. And all I can think is it because I need to have a product ready? Is it because we've only been around for a year? I mean, should we just keep working on it for like 3 more years and hope that then somebody...
You need to integrate, I do this all the time, but this is my real expertise, CTO. So you need to take this phone. I don't know if everybody can say, I got a new phone. Take this phone and AR something and go, okay, this is kind of a temporary, but this is how I envision this happening. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be.
Okay.
That was the power of the travel porter. The travel porter, we just had we had a website, we had a Google form, we had Stripe, we could swipe the card, and then everything else was spitting duct tape on the back. Like literally nobody knew there was no tech there. No one had any idea, but it just worked.
Right.
So you just kind of have to do that, unfortunately, because I don't know who's going to invest, like AR and then computer vision. It is a complex thing. That's a very complex thing. And people will have to see that. That's something you have to see, unfortunately, because it is a mixed reality thing. Go ahead, Len.
If I can add, Divya, you may be pitching to the wrong people.
That's true as well.
So I think pitching for pitching's sake is good because it helps fine tune your message and you get great feedback, but finding the right people and the right group to pitch to. And I would say that it's not always to investors that you want to pitch that to, because there are a lot of people that might understand what you're doing, like a Barbara Bickham might understand what computer vision is. And as you pitch to people like Barbara, they're gonna have relationships with people that maybe they can help make those introductions to potential funders. The other thing is, what problem are you really trying to solve with your technology? And if you can put it in context of this is what we're solving for, and this is the outcome, that makes it very tangible for an investor to understand. And sometimes deep tech is so ethereal that people don't understand what problem it's solving for. I mean, that was one of the problems with blockchain.
That's still a problem. Even today.
They don't understand what
is DeFi? We got this polka dot thing. We got this one.
Right. So it's finding the right people to pitch to, especially at the very early stage.
Yeah.
And also I would be interested in talking to you about how you are looking at maybe some non-equity funding, whether there's grants available, through DARPA or through some of the other governmental agencies that are working on forward-thinking tech, where you have where you can help solve for that, and maybe there's some grant funding that would be available, and that could help your funding issue for personnel.
That can help in development funding. Absolutely.
Because we talked to NASA for a little bit about it. They understood pretty well what we were working on, because I also realized at some point it really doesn't even need to pair with AR, right? Like anything with video.
Not really.
Yeah, like I could pair it with a video. I could do it with a video camera, anything, right? Like as long as the computer vision tech is there. So, so I was thinking like literally, okay, I quote, I do not mean to cuss on this call, but I'm quoting NASA themselves when they said, the ISS is a shithole. And they only cleaned it up prior to the cameras being there. And they were like, this could really help us find things around there and put it away and like get organized, because things are just everywhere. You can't figure it out. So that's something that we've kind of been working on. And I think what I'm going to do is apply next year and see if we can get in that way. And I think you're right. I think maybe it's the grant way that I need to go for a little bit to just get the money to initially get a team going. So thank you.
Yeah,
so much.
that was on my list. That was on my list. Grants is an untapped startup,
Yeah.
Precede, like very untapped. I mean, they do it at Lacey all the time. I'm an ER over there. At Lacey, they get grants all the time, and it's non-dilutive funding. They might get 30K, they might get 50K, but that's enough for them to do whatever they have to do and then go and get the next set. Okay, Mark, I saw your, go ahead.
Do you know how much they take on tech transfer at the end? Like what those percentages?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's all, everything's negotiable, my friend.
Yeah.
that's just life. Mark had a question. What is a reasonable ask in the pre-seed stage? It really depends on what you're building, right? I mean, if you're building a blockchain thing, you're going to need more than $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's two. Even at pre-seed. If you're building like these biotech guys and these, these kind of things dealing with the human body, you're going to need more than $1 million. Usually, like as far as my thinking is, it depends on how tech savvy you are. If you know about these no-code, low-code tools now, which are amazing, like I don't write hardly any code anymore. Like I suggest everyone use those as MVPs. You probably could get away with it for 50K, honestly, like with the whole thing, put marketing in and like you and maybe another person. Like really, I mean, you shouldn't need that much. Even to me, that's a lot because AWS is here, Google has their cloud and everybody has their specials. The Preccelerator is here and they have all these wonderful specials with all these wonderful people. We have wonderful specials with wonderful people too. So, I mean, there's a lot of tools and things that startups can take advantage of by being in an accelerator or Preccelerator. And you really don't need as much money. Like before when I was doing it, you kind of needed 250. Before, even when I was doing it, you needed like $1 million. Now that part, that was what, 2000, 2001. So like really, if you think about it, because it's gone way down, only because the tools have gotten like so much better. And you don't need, unless you're building like a real blockchain or you're doing like the deep tech, but even then you can kind of get away with it early to not have to build it because you don't want to spend $1 million of someone else's money and then like you have nothing. So like it kind of depends on what you're building. I think if you're just building something like kind of simplistic, like that's not heavy tech, then I think you get away with honestly like 50K in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll answer the question a little bit differently, Mark, because you asked the question, what's a reasonable ask at pre-seed?
A reasonable ask. Well,
So it's really use of funds, and are those use of funds in line with the thesis of the investor? And so you don't want to go to Pasadena Angels and ask for $2 million and ask them to lead it because they don't do that.
That's true.
Now, the $2 million might be what you need for a particular runway. And so you have to really strategize what your runway is, what those use of funds are, and then who you're actually asking, because you may ask an angel group for a different amount than you would for an individual investor.
That's true.
So a lot of it it's relationship based. It's knowing your customer, the customer being the investor, is to know what their needs are and how to meet their needs in what you're asking for.
That's true.
Because you may not ask for the full amount from one investor. You may just go to them and say,
you're not going to.
Yeah, we have a round open in a convertible note or in a safe note for $1 million.
Right.
And I'm asking you to be $100,000.
Yeah. I mean, usually at the pre-seed level, you're going to get the 10. This is what I call them, the 10 to 50. If you got the 50K check guy, that's high for them.
Right.
Like that's one guy to do your whole thing. But like you're
so
gonna
Barbara,
go to the lower check guys.
Yeah, along those lines, if you are taking small investments like that early on, you got a number of players. What challenges are you potentially creating by having a complicated cap table because you've got all these small investors, and then you get into a later round
There's two levels to it. Number one, there's your investor relations. So if you got 10 guys on your cap table or gals, like, that's 10 guys or gals you have to, interact with constantly. That's number one. So you have an IR issue, right?
Yeah.
There's that half of it. Then the other half of it is what you said. What happens in a later round? Well, so maybe you have to buy someone out. Maybe they don't want to come on your cap table. Maybe they look at your cap table and say, this is kind of a mess. Who advised you of this? I mean, there's very and sundry things when your cap table looks a little funny and it's not logically explained. I'll put it that way. Because I mean, if you're thinking about it and you let's say you wanted, I'll just say 500,000 and you got 10K people on there. Yeah. That's a lot of IR and that's going to be a funny looking cap table.
Yeah.
Like, what are you really doing? You're not really thinking about, did you wipe yourself out really with that cap table? Like, are you now gone? I kind of talked about that. Like, if you give up all this equity, what happens, early, what happens to you later? Even if somebody did come out, like they were specific and said, oh, this founder, I'm going to get it, and you're in the next round and you're already gone. Yeah. Because you gave up, basically all your company gone. What?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've seen with, especially like first-time entrepreneurs. It's like any money looks like good money because you're just trying to just get investment, and you create some problems for yourself downstream.
It's what Lynn said, and we do this all the time. We construct these cap tables all the time. You have to be very strategic around how much you're raising, and then who can handle that at that level. So if you're raising 500K, maybe you get 2 or 3 people, maybe 5, that's even a lot, but you don't want 10 people at 500K because then you have the 2 levels. Investor relations headache, because now you got to manage 10 people on your cap table. They need reports, they need other information. You may have somebody that's harassing you every day. Where's my money? What happened to my return? What is this? I mean, it can be like, that is a whole nother thing that we don't really talk about, I think. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because that is a thing. Like, we have investors in our fund and we have to do the I actually do all the investor relations. So I do the outreach, I do the report, I do the quarterly thing, I send them all the stuff. They need the tax information. So that is an element that you have to remember when you're constructing your cap table. And you always have to think about, you are constructing the cap table because you have to leave room for yourself and room for others and room for employees at some point. So you got to do a pool and so how are you really constructing this for the long haul?
And that also means you have to create value so you can increase your valuation. So as you go into further rounds, there's more equity to divide up.
Yeah.
Correct.
So,
it's very complex. Most people don't think about that. This part is very complex, even for venture capital.
So we're getting towards the hour here.
Yes, we are. Any other questions?
Wanted to reach out, Kevin. We haven't heard from you. You've been very patient listening. Is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation, either in a question or tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Me, Kevin?
You, Kevin. Kevin Caldwell.
Is there any other Kevin on the call?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the list. Hey, I've just been listening in, and I was paying attention to my daughter's monitor there for a second.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions and stories and commentary match, for better or for worse, some of the experience that I've had or we've had at Nucleus in, exploring funding, being pre-product, being in a sort of nuanced and complicated area of product development, specifically in learning and games. And, that's been really challenging, sort of in a similar space to deep tech, is, finding people and investors that understand the value position as parents, and, what the value of what we're developing is for kids, and sort of how that connects to, revenue and what the expectations are of different investors at different levels. We've been exploring different categories of investment, trying to find those right investors that understand the amount of money that we need up front to get to a production quality and value that is going to be interesting and engaging for kids for longer than a couple weeks, which is where a lot of ed tech is sort of currently. Started last year, right after the pandemic really got going in the sort of March timeframe, trying to raise some social impact and ed tech investors without a lot of appreciation for game development or the sort of nuanced distinction of how we're trying to set ourselves apart. I think one of the challenges there is to the layperson with respect to games and game development. It's really hard to distinguish, what's the difference in cost and production value between X and Y. And then we're trying to do some complicated sort of forward-looking progressive things with respect to curriculum and the area of development that we're focusing on, which is in social and emotional learning. And that's not really widely known or sort of well known and comprehended. So yeah, it's just been a lot of head nodding for me in some of what we've been trying. I think we've had really great conversations with some investors, and those were the closest that we were too convincing at a seed investment level. But we actually recently shifted gears in the last couple months to sort of return to an angel pre-seed raise. We kind of had an idealistic perspective that I didn't want to take anybody's money that I knew, especially unless I had a larger investor that wanted to come in and sort of give us the amount of funding that we would need to achieve some of these significant goals that we were trying to achieve. And so that downshift has allowed us to bring in some early money, start making some of that traction towards having something more significant of a proof of concept. A lot of my personal investment that I've made over the last several years has gone into fits and spurts of prototyping and helping me sort of better conceptualize what we're trying to create and how we're going to go about producing it. But it didn't really show, right? It wasn't something that was marketable or sort of ready to be shared without deep context and very nuanced explanation of this is how this is happening and what we're trying to do with it. So yeah, it's been a challenging road, but we're still at it. And that's I don't necessarily have any questions. I think a lot of the questions that have been asked have been really great and been something I've been able to empathize with.
Well, thanks for being here, Kevin. We appreciate you. And
I think Len's point of what is your practical problem solve is I'm going to emphasize that again, because for an investor or anybody, if you can explain what your value proposition is, which is basically this is the problem I'm solving, then people can relate to it or not relate to it. Then you kind of know who is interested and who is not interested, where you should spend your time and where you shouldn't spend your time.
I got some feedback from a fellow entrepreneur that had successfully raised, and they said, "Don't let a fact ruin a good story." And that sort of
it's all about the story.
Is how you tell that story. Yep.
Absolutely. Story of your company.
And just before we close, Mike Zarabian, I appreciate you listening in.
Yes, thank you.
You're a patent trademark IP attorney. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation? And I'll take that as silent Bob. So Barbara, why don't you give some closing remarks and we'll call it a day.
Well, thank you guys so much. If you guys want the slides or anything you saw, you can email me at expert@trailyn, expert@trailyn.com. And thank you, Lynn, for having me. I appreciate it as always.